Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to episode 53 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast with me, Rory Lees-Oakes. And with me as ever, the man in the transferential realm, Mr. Ken Kelly. How are you, Ken?
I am exceptionally well, feeling slightly better than I did last week. So if you're a regular listener, you'll know I was feeling a little under the weather last week. And it all played out that I actually had a cold. So everyone had to feel sorry for me and my family. But feeling much better, excited to be here, and a great episode that we have today. Some really interesting topics. We're going to be kicking off speaking about journal writing here in the UK, beginning of the new academic year. And it's a topic that is often brought up at the beginning of the year. How are you going to keep your journal, and how is that useful to you in your studies, in your own personal development? Theory with Rory today is a really interesting one, and we're touching on a good friend of Rory's again. I am the friend in the transferential realm. We're touching on our good friend Transference again, but a different view on this, Rory.
Yes, I'm going to be speaking about self-psychology, a model by Heinz Kohut, if I pronounced his name correctly, who was a contemporary of Carl Rogers. And we're going to be talking about self-object and self-object transference.
Okay.
So stay tuned for that.
Oh, I do like that. And then we're going to be ending off with a bit of a chat, and we're going to be exploring the topic of collective grief. And this is really topical. A topic that is topical, Rory, because you just recently did part 2 of a lecture on grief, which has been really well received. And that was, of course, to our counselling study resource members, where we do the lectures every second week during the UK academic year. And you're going to be taking a section of that and sharing it. We're going to be debating it and looking at that collective grief.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And, you know, it's really, really important because grief is something that comes up in the therapy room a lot. And sometimes it's by clients who don't present with issues of bereavement. It's a theme that emerges within therapy, and all therapists really should have a good handle on how to work with it.
100%. And I'm looking forward to that because, as you know, I work as a clinical supervisor. I work with supervisees, and grief is something that is often brought, and it is tricky. It is challenging being able to identify it and work with it. So we're going to be looking at that. But we open up today with journal writing. And Rory, can you give us a bit of a background? I believe this was, of course, a suggestion from our Facebook group.
Yes, so we're very grateful, as always, to Wendy Lynn Dickinson, who's a member of our Facebook group. And if you want to join our Facebook group, if you just go to Facebook and type in Counselling Tutor, you'll find us. We're a closed group. Just knock on the door. Of course, we're going to let you in. And you can join, I think it's about 13,000 other individuals who are interested in the world of counselling and psychotherapy. Have a chat, get involved, because there's so many people there on all different courses from across the world. It's absolutely a fantastic place. But she writes, "Hi, just started level 3 and wondered if anyone had any tips on journal writing to get me started, please." Thanks. So, Wendy, I hope we're going to answer your question today. Important part of becoming a counsellor, keeping a journal, I think, Ken.
I do. Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree. And as part of what we do, specifically when we go into practice and we're there with our clients, is we share the emotions that our clients bring in. And that empathy is about being there with them and sitting within their emotions and seeing it as they do. And to understand emotions and to be able to be there in someone else's emotions, we need to understand our own emotions. And it's usually a place we don't look, because if you think of a diary or a journal, it's usually a place where you might write down what happened during the day. And it will be matter of fact. I did this, I did that, I did the next thing. But a counselling journal allows you the opportunity to delve into how you felt. So it's less about what you did and more about how you felt. And it leads us to explore new words to identify the feelings we feel inside, because we don't always have a name for that, and to try and put that down on paper. And I think what's really, for me, I'm dyslexic. And when it came up that I needed to keep a journal, the hairs on the back of my neck went up straight away, Rory, because it meant writing something, and it's not my favourite place to be. But I very quickly realised I'm writing this only for me, Nobody else is going to be looking at this. So I can write the words however I choose to spell them. I can write it handwritten, and my handwriting can be so illegible that nobody else can write it, but I can do it because the journal is there for you. And I found that after a few weeks of journaling, it began to flow. And I stopped thinking about what I was writing and just let it come out as it did. And the results were really interesting. It was like having a look inside me, Rory.
Wow. Yeah, it's so important. And of course, with a journal, it would depend on what the criteria of the course asks you. Some courses just ask you to keep a journal. They don't ask for it. And it's just something for you personally. Others, however, other courses ask you to keep it in a certain way, and it has to be handed in. And what I'd do is I'd have a look. There's different models of reflective writing in terms of keeping a journal. So I've actually made a video on it. So we'll put that onto the website where the podcasts are hosted. What's also really interesting, Ken, I went up into the loft the other day. Yes, into the loft at Counselling Towers. And I've got a box file, and my box file has all my assignments in and virtually everything, bar the tape that I made when I did my skills tape, because we contracted, that was destroyed, and it was in fact destroyed. And I found my old journal and I had a look in it, and you know what my first reaction was, Ken?
What was your first reaction, Rory?
Oh dear, Rory, did you really think like that? I'd kind of forgotten about it, and I thought I'll just have a quick look. And I sat, and it was really interesting. It's 15 years, I think, since I trained, and I just looked at it and I thought, wow. I am a completely different person now than I was then. And the journal evidenced it. And it was kind of cathartic, really, because I looked at it and I thought, that is a reference made by my own handwriting. That is me then. And I look at it, and it wasn't like another person, but certainly it gave an indication of how much I've grown, both professionally in terms of my work, but also in my own personal development, and it would have been interesting to meet the Rory 14 years ago, because I'm sure that I may have gone, ooh, a little bit maybe. I'd have to be kind to him, I think. I'd have to be kind to him.
I like what you've shared there. It is a measure. It is a measure of a journey that we take. And I guess we get to the end of that journey, or where we find ourselves at the moment on that journey, which I hope is not the end. And we are there because of that journey, and because of that person you were those 15 years ago, and the lessons you were learning and the growth that you were having at that time. And that leads me on to quite an important point with regards to journaling. And I guess this is directed at our listener who sent in the topic request in the first place, is that you're going to be called on to do an assignment on your own personal journey, your own self-development. And there is no richer source than your own handwriting. There is no richer source, Rory, than the Rory from 15 years ago to measure that journey of self-development. When you can go through your journal and see what you've been through, what you were thinking, what you were feeling at that time, your assignment kind of writes itself. It can't be wrong because it is from your learning journal.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. It is such a rich seam to be able to get that to get that assignment done, and also I think it links in a lot. My own one links in a lot to practice. How my practice has matured and kind of fermented over the years. So really, really useful. And one play, if you're writing a journal, make sure you keep it safe. These are your innermost thoughts and feelings. They're a part of you. It's your intrapsychic process. There's a word, intrapsychic process, your own process. And make sure you keep it safe, and make sure that, if you feel you need to access it, then only you need to access it. Be the keeper of your own confidentiality.
I like that very, very much. And I guess the question was around tips. And I know, Rory, that the video that you're sharing gives some very, very specific tips when you have requirements of how you need to keep that journal, how you need to write that journal. And you will be hitting criteria, I guess. But if it is just a free journal and it is just for you, then I guess my tips are just let it be you. And we speak in counselling, and specifically in person-centred counselling, about an external locus of evaluation and an internal locus of evaluation, where an internal locus of evaluation is that we trust who we are and what we feel. But when we work from an external locus of evaluation, we look for other people to tell us when we feel okay. And the whole process of person-centered therapy is to work with the client that they move from that external locus of evaluation of you're going to tell me how I should feel and when I should feel good and when I should feel bad, to I trust myself. And what I might say in my tip for your journal writing is just trust yourself. It's for you, and whatever you put in, it's right.
Absolutely, and that's a great lesson, isn't it? Which we try and help clients come to. Whatever it is, it's you, and that's okay.
I love it. No more to be said on that. And of course, if you've got anything to add, get onto that Facebook page. Go to Facebook, Counselling Tutor, knock on the door, join us, and let's have this discussion thread being expanded upon, because the journals will be as unique as you are. And moving on, we've got some great theory today. Theory with Rory, looking at self-object and self-abject, or is it abstract, Rory?
It's self-object and self-object transference. Hello, transference, my old friend. We're back again.
We're going to have to make that song. We really are. You and I record that song. We'll release it.
We could put it on iTunes, couldn't we, and see if anybody would buy it. We'd have to I think I'd have to auto-tune my voice, though. I don't think that'd make the X Factor somehow. But yes, it's an interesting model by a theorist called Heinz Kohut. And the self-psychology movement was really popular in America in the 60s. And Kohut was a collaborator with Carl Rogers and Eric Berne. Yes, you see, it's amazing, isn't it? If you dig deep enough, you'll find that a lot of the theorists, they all kind of come from the same place or share ideas, and those ideas are distilled into different theories. And we're going to have a look at specifically why it was used. It was used for the treatment of narcissistic personality disorder. But in terms of, the studies that a lot of the people who listen to this do, it's about the relationship and the importance of the therapist being a solid object in the relationship. And I'm going to explain why that's key as we go into the theory.
And without any further ado, let's get into that theory, because it is now Theory with Rory.
Counselling Theory with Rory Lees Oakes.
A few months ago, I was celebrating my grandson's first birthday. We had a party with all the associated trimmings one would expect: cake, blancmange, and of course tea. It may have been the noise or the fact that Jacob had never seen so many big people in one place before, but he became a little distressed. So I took him outside to look at the trees and listen to the bird song. I noticed that after a couple of minutes, with a big sigh, he went back to his usual happy self. This little interaction illustrates a key idea in psychotherapeutic thinking, that of self-object and self-object transference. The idea that an individual can introject, by transference, another's self-regulation and emotional stability. Jacob effectively used my calmness to regulate himself, a form of transference. It's a theory drawn from the self-psychology movement and the work of Heinz Kohut in Chicago in the 1960s. Earlier this week, I caught up with Bob Cook from the Manchester Institute for Psychotherapy, who is a scholar of Kohut's work, and this is what he had to say about him.
Okay, so Kohut, probably one of the most famous psychoanalysts of our generation. Well, he's died in 1985. And in fact, if you go to YouTube, put Kohut in, you'll come to a very old grainy video, 85, it's not long ago really, talking about what you're talking about now. He was slightly attacked early about, he was attacked, academically I'm talking about, he was attacked probably for several years before this video, about his use of empathy, and we'll get onto that in a minute. And he was the creator of self-psychology in America, probably the biggest psychoanalytical psychotherapy movement around. So he's a very important, influential figure. And let's go back to your question now, okay, which really comes from the object relation movement. And it's the idea exactly of what you said, that clients will take in, almost by osmosis, if you like, a representation of the other, that's the actual therapist, through the mechanism of transference. So through transference, they start to internalize let's say this way, the good object. Okay? Mm-hmm. And then as they take that good object away, in terms of object relations thinkings, they are then able, under stress, to start to have an internalized, more internalized, healthy representation. Now, to really understand that, we must understand 2 or 3 terms. One called object constancy. When the infant starts to separate out from the mother, in the mother-infant dyad, you have a phase of time in France called the rapprochement stage, and in the UK we call this the separation individuation phase. And 2 very well-known psychoanalysts, Margaret Marler and Paul Peterson, did a lot of research and came up with a whole map of the age of the infant between 1.5 and 3.5, where they start to actually form part of themselves. And the way that they develop their internalized psychological map is to internalize the mother, which we're going to call the object, so that as they separate, they can take psychologically an internalized positive object to provide a level of consistency over time, and specifically under stress.
Yeah, so what we're talking really here is a model to be able to self-regulate, and when there's a lot of stress, they can draw. Most of us who've been parented in a kind of correct way would draw on our history of parenting and use that to regulate us. But someone who's not got that may get into all sorts of difficulty. So they literally borrow it or take it from the therapist. And
correct.
Yeah. And I guess, Bob, just as I muse about therapy in general, it kind of feels that no matter what therapy you study, there's always going to be an element of that, because I'm thinking of Clarkson and the reparenting style. I'm thinking of Rogers and, you know, being the good enough other. It comes up so often in different therapies, doesn't it? It runs through them.
Yeah, because we're talking about psychological development.
Mm.
We're talking about what makes up the psychic structure of the human being, and without doubt, the way that we developed is to, as I said, we start to separate, and the only way we separate in the way that we're talking about here is to develop an internalized map of self-objects. Now, the really important thing, besides what you've just said, is what Cohen talked about in terms of negative self-objects and positive self-objects. So just as if it was a healthy process, we start to, of course, internalize healthy self-objects. We also, if I can use the word faulty, perhaps not a very good word, you also internalize negative self-objects. And the more unhealthy parenting, the more negative self-objects you've got. Now, as everybody in the human universe does this, then we have, a lot of negative and self-objects and positive self-objects. Now, if we've got more negative self-objects, we then, under stress, as you've just said, lack the ability to self-soothe well, to emotionally regulate, to be able to hold memory over a consistent amount of time, this lies in the world of bipolar, depression. It's at the basis of self-esteem and all the modern mental health issues we've got.
So there you have it. The theory indicates that our early interaction with caregivers as children forms self-objects that we can draw on to help regulate ourselves if these are positive. However, if our early experience of caregivers is poor, abusive or neglectful, we are left with a deficit of self-objects in the form of low self-esteem and low emotional regulation. Cohert's idea was that, like Jacob, a client could regulate themselves by being in the presence of someone who is stable and emotionally grounded. It's a theory that stood the test of time and is referred to in psychotherapeutic terms as therapist modelling, and appears in theories such as Clarkson's 5 relationship model as reparenting, the idea that the therapist is a consistent, positive object in the client's life that the client can draw on through transference to self-regulate and perhaps heal.
Thank you very much, Rory. Great insight again into transference, which, as you say, shows its head again and again and again. And of course, you've got that valuable download, that resource with the references, of course, Rory, that you've made available, that you've painstakingly taken your time to research and distill down the main facts of what you've shared with us today. And everyone, you can get that. And the way you do that is you go to our website, that is counsellingtutor.com. That's our mother website. And you're going to click on the podcasts tab, which is in the main menu. Go to episode 53 and you can download that handout from within the show notes. And of course, we write show notes for all of our podcasts to give you a summary of what was covered. However, if you are a Counselling Study Resource member, then you will have the handout. It has already been added to your Handouts Vault. And of course, anybody can join the Handouts Vault. Handouts Vault is just all of the resources that we make available on the Counselling Tutor website. We've taken them, all of Rory's personal handouts from over 10 years of being a lecturer, a lot of those taken, and they've been put into that handout vault for you, so it's there as well for you. And moving on, because we've got a great topic that we're going to be looking at, and that is collective grief. You did a lecture just recently. You finished part 2 of your 2-part lecture, Rory, that is, of course, again in the Counselling Study Resource in the lecture library. But we're speaking specifically today about collective grief, mass grief, I guess.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and you're right, I did touch on it in a recent 2-part lecture. And if you are a member of the CSR study group or the CSR library, you can go into there and you can watch it, and also you can get a CPD certificate, 2-hour CPD certificate.
Oh, I like it.
You can print out and put in your folder, which is really good. Yeah, it's really interesting. A few weeks ago, I noticed that people were sporting a lot of bee tattoos. And I know on the back of my car, I've got a bee. And the reason for that is I'm a proud son of Manchester. And the events of May of this year in Manchester, where somebody set a bomb off and there was deaths and terrible sadness and a completely awful situation, really made people come together in a collective way. And we see this echoed in a lot of things, and it certainly presents in the therapy room. So in terms of societal and kind of sociological issues, recently we've revisited the 20th anniversary of the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. And I can remember I think it was 1992, that literally where I live, the whole world stopped to mourn Diana. And more recently with the bombing in Manchester, everybody I knew seemed to watch the One Love Manchester gig.
Yes.
And it was a real healing thing. I have to be honest, the Diana, I didn't really feel connected to her, but I did feel really super connected when I was watching the gig and felt a sense of, it's almost cathartic relief and connection. And it's noticeable. I've just put a bee on the back of my car. I never thought of it until I started to write the lecture, that actually it's a mark of grieving.
Yes.
It's a mark of grieving. And collective grief is really important for humans, because it signifies that we can all share the same experience. As human beings, we get to where we are because we're a collective society. And it's more of a sociological thing, but it's really, really important. And one of the things I noted when I was reading Therapy Today, in I think it was June last year, when we had the referendum for Brexit, which seems to be perennially in the news, was that therapists were talking about people presenting with anxiety over Brexit.
Yes.
And again, that is about loss. And loss comes up so often in the therapy room. And unless we have a really good idea of loss and the process of it, we can miss clients, Ken. miss them.
Yeah. And I guess having an understanding that collective grief exists and that we can prepare for that when our clients are coming in and they may be carrying something that is not related to their own journey, something that they've heard. And I'm relating now to stuff that's going on in the news at the moment. There's been some terrible hurricanes that have been bashing the world and people losing their homes, people losing their lives. And it's very sad. And I found myself moved to tears in a news program as they were describing this, because I'm empathically connecting with the plight of these people, and it affected my mood. It affected how I went into my day, and it can affect our clients, and we need to be aware of that when they come into our room, that they may be carrying, I guess, somebody else's stuff, but it is their connection to somebody else's stuff through collective grief.
Yeah, I also think it's a conduit for people's own unresolved grief.
Yes, I like that.
Sometimes it's really noticeable. Long before I became a therapist, I can remember people talking about Lady Diana, and there was a woman that used to serve me my muffins in the muffin shop, and she said to me, I was just like Lady Diana. And I went to her and I thought at the time, and I'll be honest, I thought, what a ridiculous statement. You know, she was a German aristocrat of, German heritage, an aristocrat. And, you work at a cake shop. But what I realise now as a therapist, of course, it opens up a conduit to other people's grief. So there's a transference there, Ken. Another transference.
We're going to have to rename this the Transference Podcast, Rory.
There's another transference there where people then start to access their own processes.
Yes.
And I think one of the dangers, and I think there is a danger, is if you have someone who comes to you who's having a collective grief where you're not part of that collective, you need to think and process how you're going to enter that frame of reference. Because if someone turns up and is devastated about, say, the death of a sports star,
yes,
and you're not, or a music icon, George Michael, recently it sadly passed away at Christmas. If you have a client who talks about that and you're not a fan or you're not connected to that, you really need to be very, very careful and very thoughtful about how to work with the client. That's why my lecture was so useful to people. People said, well, that's really useful because it allowed people, it allows the therapist to be able to be thoughtful and maybe a little bit inquiring into the bereavements or losses that a client might have. It can bring up stuff from the past, is what I'm trying to say.
Very much so. And again, it's about grief. It's about loss. It's complex. It's really complex. There was something interesting with the anniversary of Lady Diana. There was a documentary about her life and the loss where her boys were talking about that openly. One of the things that they were sharing is that it was difficult for them to see the public outpouring of the grief, that there would be people sobbing and crying, and they felt almost a level of resentment as to, but you don't really know her. How can you be feeling this? And that's what you're kind of touching on there, is that, and I liked as well. Sorry, I'm jumping around a bit here. That how you use the conduit, and that conduit I think is really important, and the transferential side of this, because what is it we're linking into? Because I don't know Lady Diana, and maybe I would have been grieving, but what am I really grieving? What is it that I'm keying into? And I often I've heard in therapy of a client presenting, and they may have lost somebody that was very dear to them, and they may say something like, I never cried when my dad died, but I just went to a twice removed cousin's funeral and I was sobbing my eyes out. And I wonder if there's not a connection there, that they're digging into the grief through that conduit.
Yeah, one of the things about collective grief, it gives a permission. It gives a collective permission. And one of the things that I was noticed in Manchester, I went to Manchester, saw all the flowers, and I wasn't actually there when there was a poet who talked about a poet, but I can remember filling up when I heard someone singing Don't Look Back in Anger, which of course was penned by a proud son of Manchester, Noel Gallagher. And I'm not going to say every Mancunian knows how to sing the words, but you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who lives in Manchester who couldn't at least sing the opening lines of Don't Look Back in Anger. And I felt myself, in fact, I'm feeling a little emotional now just talking about it, really powerful. And one of the things that collective grief gives us is the permission to feel grief.
Wow. It's powerful.
And it is powerful and very useful because it is a natural, for a lot of people, for some it may not be, but generally it's a natural occurring phenomenon in the human condition, and it just kickstarts it. But Don't Look Back in Anger, Ken.
Wow. A really, really powerful episode today. I think all of the topics that we've covered have had some great depth to them. I've enjoyed discussing about grief, about loss. And of course, if you are a CSR member and you haven't seen that lecture, get in. Log in, go to the lecture library, go watch it, go and get your CPD certificate. If you're not a member of the Counselling Study Resource and wondering what it is, well, it's separate to Counselling Tutor. Counselling Tutor is where you're listening to this podcast through, and we make a lot of free resources available. But we do have a special set of resources that we make available for paid members, and we call it the Counselling Study Resource. And if you want to know more about that, well, there's a message at the end of this podcast that you can listen to, or just go to counsellingtutor.com, and on the front page there's a big link and you can go and have a look at that. But today we started off and we looked at journal writing. We then explored Theory with Rory, where we looked at transference, and we looked at self-object and self-object transference, and of course ending off speaking about loss, grief, but more collective grief and how that might show in our counselling rooms and how we might work with that and how that may be a conduit and a transference into that person's loss. Great episode, Rory.
Yeah, absolutely. And as always, stay grounded, stay safe.
Take care. If you enjoy the topics and handouts here on the Counselling Tutor podcast, then you will love the Counselling Study Resource. CSR was built by myself, Ken, and Rory Lees Oaks to give you the support you need during your counselling studies. So get access to the world's most comprehensive collection of resources aimed at supporting you in your journey to become a counsellor. Take the stress out of your studies by visiting counsellingtutor.com/CSR. That's counsellingtutor.com/CSR.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.